The alarms on Council World Aurelian did not sound like warnings. They sounded like confessions, deep and continuous, echoing through crystal towers and orbital rings, as if the planet itself had realized it was already too late. In the vacuum above, the star Helior began to convulse, its surface folding inward and outward in violent waves, shedding radiation like burning skin, and every astrophysics model confirmed the same impossible truth. The star was entering a premature collapse that should not exist for another 5,000 years. In the Grand Council chamber, 12 species watched the projections in stunned silence, their greatest minds recalculating the same numbers again and again, hoping the universe had made a mistake. It had not. Aurelian was the political heart of the galaxy, a neutral world protected by treaties, fleets, and laws thicker than armor plating. Yet none of that mattered against a star tearing itself apart. Evacuation protocols activated automatically, then stalled as traffic density exceeded every safe margin, civilian transports clogging the orbital lanes, while bureaucratic fail-safes demanded authorization codes that no one alive had ever been required to use. The galaxy was efficient in peace, elegant in theory, and catastrophically slow in practice. High Counselor Threx of the Volari stood from his levitating dais, his translucent skin flickering with stress patterns as he raised his voice over the rising chaos. Emergency response fleets from all member systems are hereby requested to mobilize in accordance with Protocol Crimson 7. His words triggered a cascade of automated messages firing across known space, requests wrapped in permissions, approvals, and jurisdictional disclaimers. Somewhere far away, admirals would read them, debate them, and file them correctly, while Aurelian's sky burned brighter by the second. In the observation tier, Junior Counselor Lyra Venn watched the star swell on the display, her hands clenched so tightly her nails cut into her palms. She had studied disaster theory at the academy, memorized every case where entire civilizations vanished while waiting for consensus, and she felt a cold realization forming that no one in the chamber dared speak aloud. They were about to become another lesson. Then something broke the pattern. An alert cut across every screen without authorization, its origin tag flashing red instead of council blue, and several guards reached for weapons as the chamber lights dimmed to accommodate a new projection. A single line of text appeared, stark and unmistakable. Human emergency response signal detected. The chamber erupted. Shouts overlapped in half a dozen languages, some demanding the signal be blocked, others insisting it violated neutrality accords, and more than a few voices laced with open resentment. Humans were not council members. Humans did not follow protocol. Humans did not wait their turn. Before anyone could issue an order, space itself rippled above Aurelian's upper atmosphere, not with the elegant folding of standard faster-than-light transitions, but with something violent and abrupt, like reality being forced aside. One by one, ships tore into existence, angular, scarred, and unmistakably human. Not a fleet in parade formation, but a swarm in motion. Engines already burning hot, trajectories plotted without consultation or approval. Lyra felt her breath catch as she counted them. 50 ships. No, more. Heavy carriers, strike cruisers, rescue barges, engineering hulks with hulls still bearing the marks of previous catastrophes. They moved fast, dangerously fast, ignoring traffic lanes, cutting through evacuation corridors with the confidence of predators that knew exactly where they were going. High Counselor Threx slammed his manipulator limb against his console. Who authorized this incursion? This world is under council protection. The human fleet is in violation of at least 12 interstellar statutes. A response came instantly, routed through open channels without encryption, a human voice cutting through the chamber with calm, practiced urgency. Aurelian Council, this is Commander Elias Rourke of the Terran Emergency Response Fleet. Your star is destabilizing faster than your models predict. You have 39 minutes before primary collapse. We are initiating full-scale civilian extraction and stellar containment procedures. Containment. The word sent a shock through the chamber. Stellar containment was theoretical, untested, and classified by most species as suicidal. Threx recoiled. You are not authorized to conduct operations of that magnitude within Council space. You must stand down and await coordinated command approval. There was a pause, brief but heavy, and Lyra imagined the human commander looking at the same data they were, making the same calculations, and discarding the same rules. Commander Rourke's voice returned, harder now. With respect, Counselor, if we wait for permission, everyone on this planet dies. The human ships did not slow. Rescue craft plunged into the atmosphere, shields flaring as radiation levels spiked, while engineering vessels deployed massive lattice structures around the dying star, machines unfolding that had never been shown to non-human eyes. On Aurelian's surface, evacuation alarms shifted tone, synchronized suddenly, efficiently, and transport bottlenecks dissolved as human traffic algorithms overrode local control systems without asking. Lyra realized something then, a quiet horror beneath the awe. The humans had not come to ask if they could help. They had come because they assumed no one else would act in time. Somewhere out there, across 1,000 disaster sites and forgotten colonies, this had happened before. The galaxy hesitated. Humanity moved. As the star convulsed again, shedding a wave of energy that rattled the council chamber, Lyra whispered the question that burned in her mind, the one she would later ask aloud. Why are they always first? Above them, the human fleet accelerated toward the impossible task of saving a world, and deep within Helior's core, something ancient and unstable began to awaken, something the humans had detected but not yet revealed, something that would turn a rescue into a reckoning.
The star Helior screamed without sound as its core twisted into geometries that should not exist, radiation spilling outward in violent pulses that battered the human containment lattice and sent shock waves through every Council sensor array. And for the first time in recorded galactic history, the Council was forced to watch a crisis it could not control being handled by a species it had never fully trusted. As Commander Elias Rourke stood on the bridge of the Terran carrier Resolute with his jaw clenched and eyes locked on cascading data that painted a far darker picture than he had revealed. Because Helior was not merely collapsing, it was infected. Its quantum layers fraying as if something had been feeding on the star's energy from within, something ancient, something that should have died before most Council species had learned fire. And Rourke knew the signs because humanity had seen them once before on a forgotten red dwarf near the edge of explored space where no Council ship had responded to the distress call until it was far too late. Around him, his crew moved with controlled urgency, issuing evacuation overrides, deploying gravitic anchors, and routing millions of civilians through human-built corridors that ignored local traffic laws entirely. While on Aurelian's surface, panic gave way to stunned obedience as transports that had been stalled for hours suddenly found clear paths carved through space by human warships that did not ask, did not wait, and did not apologize. In the Council chamber, outrage boiled as fast as fear. High Counselor Threx demanding sanctions even as casualty projections plummeted in real time, and Junior Counselor Lyra Venn watched the numbers with disbelief as evacuation efficiency climbed past anything she had been taught was possible, her attention drawn to a private data stream she should not have been able to access, but which the humans had opened anyway. Raw feeds from inside Helior itself, showing fractures in space-time like black veins crawling through the stellar core. And when she realized what she was seeing, her breath caught, because the Academy had taught her that such anomalies were theoretical impossibilities or extinction-level events, never both at once. The human commander's voice cut back into the chamber, no longer asking permission, but delivering information like a weapon, informing the council that Helior's collapse was being accelerated by a dimensional parasite siphoning stellar mass, a hive-form entity older than most known civilizations, drawn to population centers by the energy output of advanced worlds. And as the chamber erupted again with disbelief and denial, Rourke delivered the line that silenced them all, telling them that if containment failed, the parasite would detonate the star into a cascading rupture that would tear open subspace across half the sector, killing billions far beyond Aurelian, and that humanity was initiating Protocol Black response whether the Council approved or not. Outside, the human fleet shifted formation, rescue vessels pulling back as heavily armored ships surged forward, massive emitters unfolding along their hulls as crews prepared to fire weapons not designed to kill ships but to cauterize reality itself. Experimental tech banned by council law because it had once nearly destroyed a human system during testing. And Lyra felt a chill as she understood the pattern at last, that humans were not reckless because they ignored rules because they had already paid the price for obeying them. And now, as Helior's surface split open in a blinding flare, and something vast began to push its way out from the star's heart, something that made even seasoned counselors recoil in primal terror, the alarms changed tone again, not warning of evacuation failure, but of incoming contact from inside the star. And Commander Rourke's final transmission before weapons discharge carried no triumph and no fear, only grim certainty as he said that if this failed, there would be no council left to argue with, because humanity had not come to save a world this time, it had come to stop a god from being born. The moment the entity emerged from Helior's core, every known scientific framework collapsed at once, because it was not a creature in any biological sense, but a structure of will and hunger, a lattice of dark energy and folded dimensions that peeled itself out of the star like a shadow shedding light, its presence alone bending sensor readings into nonsense and triggering instinctive terror across species that had never evolved fear responses to anything but physical threats. And on the bridge of the Resolute, hardened human officers felt it too, not as panic, but as pressure, the same suffocating awareness reported by the few survivors of the earlier Red Dwarf incident, the sense of being observed by something vast and indifferent that had already decided their fate. Commander Rourke did not flinch, because this was the moment humanity had prepared for in silence, the reason Terran emergency response fleets carried weapons the Council had outlawed and contingency plans no one else had been told about. And as the parasite extended filamentous tendrils into surrounding space, drinking radiation and gravitational force alike, Rourke issued the order that had never before been spoken outside classified simulations, authorizing Protocol Black to transition from containment to eradication, knowing full well that if the Council understood what was about to happen, they would try to stop it. Across the fleet, human ships locked into a precise geometric array that ignored traditional battle formations, their emitters synchronizing not by command hierarchy, but by distributed consensus algorithms modeled after swarm behavior on ancient Earth. And as energy built to catastrophic levels, the Council chamber shook again, not from stellar instability, but from subspace resonance as reality itself protested what the humans were about to do. High Counselor Threx shouted orders to disengage, to demand a ceasefire, to threaten sanctions and war, but his words were drowned out as the chamber's displays filled with impossible data, showing that the human weapons were not targeting the entity's mass, but its anchors, the points where it intersected with local space-time, something no Council scientist had ever believed could be attacked directly. Junior Counselor Lyra felt her worldview shatter as she realized the horrifying brilliance of it, that humanity was not trying to fight the godlike thing head-on, but to sever it from existence, to make the universe reject it the way a body rejects a foreign object. And she understood then why humans always arrived first, because this kind of knowledge was bought only through catastrophic failure, through entire systems lost while waiting for approval that never came. The first strike hit like a silent scream, a wave of engineered causality inversion that tore through the parasite's outer structure and forced it partially out of phase, causing Helior's collapse to stutter as if confused. And for a brief, terrifying moment, it looked like it might work, like the humans might actually be able to kill something the Council had mistaken for a natural disaster. Then the entity reacted, not with rage, but with adaptation, folding inward and emitting a counterwave that shattered two human engineering ships instantly, their hulls crumbling as if crushed by invisible hands, and gasps rippled through the council chamber as casualty markers appeared for the first time on the human side, because until that moment, many had believed the humans were invincible. Rourke closed his eyes for half a second, marking the names that would later be carved into memorial steel, then ordered the fleet to continue without hesitation, because hesitation was how gods were born. And as the parasite began to reorganize itself, learning, evolving, and reaching toward the planet below with renewed intent, the sensors detected something even worse forming deep within its core, a secondary structure, a signal that suggested this was not an isolated entity, but a seed, and that if it survived long enough, it would call others like it from beyond the known universe. The Council finally understood the scale of what was happening, just as the humans did something unthinkable, diverting power from planetary shields to fuel a final strike that would either erase the entity completely or tear open a permanent wound in space. And as Helior flared blinding white and the human fleet charged weapons beyond safe limits, Lyra realized with chilling clarity that the humans had not come expecting to win. They had come expecting to die, if that was what it took, to make sure no one else ever had to face this again.
The final strike began not with an explosion, but with silence, as every human vessel cut non-essential systems and poured raw power into the black response array, space around the fleet dimming, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. And across the council chamber, even the most defiant voices fell quiet, because something about the moment felt irreversible, like watching a blade already in motion. Commander Rourke stood rigid as the parasite recoiled, its structure warping and unfolding in rapid, desperate configurations as it attempted to anchor itself deeper into local reality, tendrils lashing outward toward Aurelian in a reflexive bid for survival. And human point defense batteries shredded them with ruthless efficiency, not to protect the fleet, but to buy time for a calculation no council system could have completed in 1,000 cycles. The black response fired in stages, not as a single beam, but as a cascading sequence of spatial edits, each pulse rewriting the rules in a shrinking sphere around the entity, forcing it to exist in fewer and fewer dimensions until its vast form began to collapse inward, and for the first time the thing emitted a signal that translated across multiple species as something disturbingly close to pain. Helior's collapse slowed, then stuttered again, and evacuation projections ticked upward as millions more lives were pulled out of the gravity well by human ships that continued their work even as the sky burned above them, because humanity did not believe in choosing between rescue and combat, only in doing both until their hands failed. In the council chamber, Lyra watched as Threats slumped back into his seat, his authority meaningless in the face of a species that had just taken command of the universe itself. And she wondered how many times this had already happened beyond council space, worlds saved without thanks, catastrophes erased before they could become history.
The parasite fought back with a final, devastating adaptation, collapsing part of its mass into a singularity spike that punched through the black response field and tore a Terran cruiser in half, the ship's last transmission, a burst of static and half-finished orders, and a low sound rippled through the human fleet as loss registered, not as panic, but as resolve hardening into something dangerous. Rourke's voice carried across every channel, steady and unyielding, ordering the array to tighten and the fleet to advance directly into the distortion zone, a move that violated every safety doctrine ever written, and several counselors shouted in horror as human ships plunged toward the dying star and the writhing entity as if they intended to follow it into oblivion. The second stage of black response activated at point-blank range, emitters burning out, hulls glowing, crews bracing against forces that would liquefy most known species, and the parasite began to unravel in earnest, its structure tearing apart as the universe rejected it piece by piece, until, with a soundless flash, it collapsed into nothing, leaving behind a wound in space that sealed itself like cooling glass. For several seconds, no one spoke, because Helios stabilized, its core damaged but no longer collapsing, the extinction event halted by a species that had refused to wait. Then new alarms began to sound, quieter but far more ominous, as human sensors detected residual signals echoing outward from the eradication point, a broadcast that had escaped before the entity died, and Rourke knew with cold certainty that the galaxy had just been marked. He ordered immediate withdrawal of remaining rescue assets and initiated data lockdown, because what came next could not be allowed to spread unchecked. And as the human fleet began to pull back, battered but victorious, Lyra realized that the disaster had not been a random tragedy at all, but a test, one humanity had passed at terrible cost, while the rest of the galaxy had stood paralyzed. As Helios burned steadily once more, and Aurelian lived, a new truth settled over the council chamber like ash, that the humans had not saved the world because they were kind, were brave, or even heroic, but because if they had not acted, no one else would have, and somewhere beyond the edge of known space, something ancient had just learned that humanity existed.
The Council's official statement declared Aurelian saved by unified galactic effort, but no one in the chamber believed the words as they echoed hollowly across public channels, because the censor records told a different story, one that spread quietly through analyst circles and military academies despite attempts to classify it, showing human ships absorbing losses without retreat, executing impossible maneuvers inside stellar death zones, and deploying weapons that did not simply destroy, but corrected reality itself. And as Commander Rourke's fleet limped away from Helios with hulls scarred and crews exhausted, he ordered total communication silence, not out of secrecy, but necessity, because the residual signal detected after the parasite's death was still propagating outward, a low-frequency call that did not travel through space so much as through probability, something humanity had learned to recognize too late the first time. On Aurelian, evacuation shelters filled with survivors who whispered the same question to one another, why the humans came when no one else did, while junior counselor Lyra sat alone reviewing fragments of data the council had missed, pieces that painted an even more unsettling picture, that the parasite had not targeted Aurelian randomly, but had been drawn there by the council itself, by the sheer density of population, energy consumption, and political gravity, making the heart of the galaxy a beacon to things that fed on civilization. Across human space, emergency response fleets began mobilizing without announcement, ships redirecting from distant missions as silent priority flags lit up across Terran networks, because the signal was being detected in multiple sectors now, faint but unmistakable, and Rourke knew what that meant, that the entity had not been alone, that what they destroyed was a scout or a seed, and that somewhere beyond mapped stars, others were listening.
In the council chamber, High Counselor Threx finally demanded an explanation, summoning Lyra after hours of deliberation, his voice stripped of arrogance as he asked the question that had haunted the room since the first human ship arrived: why humanity always responded first, why they seemed prepared for catastrophes no one else even believed in. And Lyra answered him with a truth she barely understood herself, that humans did not see disasters as anomalies, but as inevitabilities, that on their homeworld, floods, fires, storms, and plagues had taught them early that survival favored those who acted before consensus formed. Far from Aurelian, Rourke stood before a memorial wall aboard the Resolute as the names of the lost were etched into steel, each letter a quiet promise, and he recorded a log that would not be released for decades, explaining that humanity had not volunteered to be the galaxy's emergency response. It had been forced into the role by a universe that punished hesitation, and that if the Council truly wished to survive what was coming, they would need to abandon the comfort of procedure and learn to move as fast as fear. As the fleet jumped to faster than light, scattering to positions only humans knew to guard, the last sensor ping from the eradication zone registered a distortion forming again, not large, not immediate, but growing, and Rourke understood with grim clarity that Helior had been a warning shot, that the galaxy's age of comfortable ignorance was over, and that the next time the alarms sounded, there might not be enough humans to answer them all.
The next alarms did not sound from a council world or a populated system, but from a quiet trade corridor considered strategically irrelevant, a place where bureaucracy had grown complacent and patrols were thin. And when the alert reached the council, it was almost dismissed as a sensor malfunction until human observers flagged it as critical within seconds, identifying the same probabilistic distortion pattern that had preceded Helior's crisis. Only this time, it was spreading faster and without the stabilizing presence of a star to anchor it. Commander Rourke received the data mid-jump and felt his stomach sink as projections filled his command display, because this was worse than before. Not a single parasite, but a cascade, multiple anchor points forming simultaneously along the corridor, each one a potential gateway for something that did not belong in this universe. The Terran emergency response fleets converged without waiting for orders, ships burning through fuel reserves at reckless rates, while Council task forces hesitated, trapped in debate over jurisdiction and risk assessment, and Lyra watched the feeds from Aurelian with mounting dread as the familiar pattern repeated itself, humans moving while the galaxy argued. This time, however, the humans did not arrive to save a world. They arrived to make a stand, deploying deep space interdiction arrays and evacuating only those ships unlucky enough to be caught nearby, because there was nothing to protect here except the line beyond which the infestation could not be allowed to spread. Rourke addressed his fleet with brutal honesty, telling them that containment was unlikely, that eradication might fail, and that withdrawal was not an option, because if these gateways stabilized, they would open a corridor straight into the heart of inhabited space. And as his words echoed through human vessels across light years, there was no panic, only acceptance, because humanity had never believed survival was guaranteed, only that it was worth fighting for. When the cascade activated, space along the corridor folded inward like a collapsing lung, and shapes began to emerge, smaller than the Helior entity, but faster, more numerous, and terrifyingly coordinated, swarming toward human lines with predatory efficiency. And the first engagements were brutal, human ships tearing into the swarm with precision while taking heavy losses, the battle unfolding in a region where there were no civilians to witness it, no council observers to record it, only humans and the things they were holding back. On Aurelian, Lyra felt something break as casualty reports poured in, because for the first time, the humans were dying in numbers the Council could not ignore, and she realized the unspoken truth that humanity had been acting as a shield for the galaxy without ever saying so, absorbing threats before they could be named, and now that shield was cracking. As the fight escalated and the corridor burned, Rourke made the call that would change everything, authorizing the use of a device humanity had sworn never to deploy again, a reality anchor designed to collapse an entire region of space into an uninhabitable scar, a permanent wound that would stop the infestation at the cost of everything within it, including his fleet. He transmitted one final message on open channels, not as a commander, but as a representative of his species, telling the galaxy that humanity had bought them time once again, and that this time they could not do it alone. As the device armed and human ships maneuvered to hold the line for the last seconds, Lyra understood the full weight of the answer she would later give to the terrified counselor, who asked why humans always showed up first. Because on Earth, when disaster comes, you do not ask who should act, you ask who will. And humanity had always known the difference.
The detonation did not look like an explosion so much as an erasure. A silent folding of existence where the trade corridor had been, light bending inward and then vanishing, as if the universe itself had closed its eyes. And for a fraction of a second, every sensor across known space went blind, forcing the council chambers into stunned silence as data streams cut out and emergency lights flickered on, because no one had believed the humans would actually do it. When the sensors came back, the corridor was gone, replaced by a gravitational scar so dense and unstable that no ship, signal, or particle could ever cross it again, a permanent wall carved into reality, and with it went the Terran emergency response fleets that had held the line. Casualty estimates finalized minutes later confirmed what everyone already feared: entire human formations erased, tens of thousands dead, names still scrolling, when Lyra stood and demanded the council listen, because for the first time in its history, the Galactic Assembly had been saved not by consensus or doctrine, but by sacrifice it had never authorized. Across human space, the loss was felt immediately, not with panic, but with a quiet heaviness that settled into cities, stations, and ships, memorial beacons activating without ceremony, because humanity had learned long ago how to grieve while still moving forward. Within hours, new distress signals began to surface from systems bordering the scar, not from threats, but from council worlds suddenly realizing how exposed they were, how many times humans must have intervened before disaster ever reached public awareness, and emergency requests flooded Terran command channels faster than they could be acknowledged. The Council attempted to issue formal commendations, resolutions of gratitude, even proposals to place human forces under centralized authority, and each was met with polite but firm refusal, because the humans were not interested in medals or control, only in response time. Lyra received a private transmission from Terran High Command shortly after, a single human officer speaking plainly, telling her that the cascade had been only one branch of a larger pattern, that similar distortions had been detected beyond the rim, farther out than Council sensors typically monitored, and that humanity had been quietly tracking them for years, responding early, burning threats out before they reached populated space, never escalating them to the Council because debates took too long and lives were always the cost. The revelation hit like a physical blow, because it reframed centuries of galactic stability as something maintained not by treaties, but by constant, invisible human intervention. And when Lyra brought this information before the Assembly, the reaction was not disbelief, but fear, a slow, dawning horror as the Council realized how little they truly understood the dangers beyond their borders. Arguments erupted, accusations flew, some counselors demanding humanity share its data and technology, others insisting humans had overstepped their authority. But the loudest voices fell silent when a new alert cut through the chamber, an ancient, automated warning from a dead civilization, reactivated for the first time in millennia, describing a convergence event approaching from intergalactic dark, something far larger and more organized than anything encountered before. The humans responded before the council finished reading the translation, fleets already mobilizing, evacuation corridors being mapped, civilian shelters activated on worlds that did not yet know they were in danger, and when a senior counselor demanded to know why humanity was acting without approval yet again, Lyra answered for them, her voice steady despite the terror coiling in her chest, because if they waited now, there would be no one left to argue over jurisdiction. As human armadas burned toward the dark edge of the galaxy, the same question echoed across council space, whispered in fear and awe, why humans always showed up first. And this time, the answer carried a heavier weight. Because on Earth, emergency response was not a job or a protocol, it was a reflex, forged by a world that never stopped trying to kill its people, and humanity had simply carried that instinct into the stars. Near the end of the transmission cycle, a final human message was broadcast on open frequencies, not a call to arms, but an invitation, asking the galaxy to watch, to learn, and to finally decide whether they would keep hiding behind human response times or stand with them when the next disaster arrived. And as the first distant stars began to dim in patterns that defied known physics, the Council realized the truth they had avoided for generations, that humanity was not just the galaxy's emergency response, it was its early warning system, its shield, and possibly its last line of defense.
The stars at the galactic edge did not go dark all at once, but in sequences that spelled intent, entire constellations dimming in precise intervals, as if something vast were testing the light itself. And when the first long-range images finally resolved, even human analysts went silent, because what emerged from the intergalactic dark was not a swarm or a rift, but an organized front. Colossal structures moving in formation, each one dwarfing fleets, their surfaces etched with geometries that bent sensors and made physics feel optional. The council chamber erupted into chaos, protocols collapsing under the weight of a threat no charter had prepared for, and in that noise, Lyra heard the truth like a blade sliding free. This was not a disaster to be mitigated, it was an extinction event arriving on schedule. Human fleets continued to deploy, not in panicked mass, but in layers, response groups interlocking with evacuation arcs and deep space denial zones, every movement fast and purposeful. And for the first time, Council forces did not lag behind, because watching humans die in silence had burned something into them that debate could no longer smother. As the armadas closed, the unknown force spoke, not in words, but in actions, collapsing a star into a cold singularity to clear a path, a casual demonstration of power that sent fear rippling through every species watching. And the Council demanded to know if humanity had a plan, if there was some final weapon or secret reserve. The human reply was simple and devastating, transmitted without drama, stating that there was no miracle coming, only preparation, coordination, and the willingness to move faster than fear. Rourke's successor took command at the front, his voice steady as he explained to Allied captains how to survive the opening contact, where to fall back, where not to, and why hesitation would be fatal. And as the first exchange began, the humans did something no one expected. They broadcast everything, live feeds of the battle, the losses, the decisions, the mistakes, because emergency response was useless if no one else learned how to act under fire. Across the galaxy, civilians watched humans bleed and adapt in real time, saw how they broke formation to save Allied ships, how they abandoned perfect strategy to preserve lives, and something fundamental shifted as species who had never been asked to choose now found themselves choosing anyway.
Near the battle's peak, when it seemed the human lines would finally break, the unknown force paused, its advance slowing as if reassessing, and a transmission cut through the noise, translated into every known language, asking a single question about why this species, so small and loud and inefficient, refused to retreat even when survival probabilities collapsed. The human commander answered without hesitation, his words carrying across space and into history, saying that on Earth they learned early that survival was not about odds, but about responsibility. That when the alarm sounds, you run toward it because someone has to, and once you accept that, fear loses its leverage. The advance stalled, not because the enemy felt mercy, but because it had encountered something it could not model, a civilization that treated emergency response as identity rather than doctrine. And in that hesitation, the galaxy moved as one for the first time, fleets surging forward behind human lines, protocols discarded, permission irrelevant. When the battle finally tipped and the unknown force withdrew into the dark, leaving behind shattered megastructures and a silence heavy with disbelief, Lyra understood that the question she had once been asked had been the wrong one, because it was not why humans always showed up first, but why the rest of the galaxy had waited so long to follow. In the aftermath, as recovery began and stories spread, the humans did not claim victory, only reminded everyone listening that emergencies never truly end, they only change shape, and that next time the alarm sounded, it would matter who answered and how fast. Somewhere beyond the rim, sensors flickered again, hinting that the dark was not finished watching, and as that knowledge settled in, the galaxy realized it had crossed a line from spectators to participants, a moment worth remembering, worth arguing about, worth sharing with anyone who still believed safety came from rules instead of action. Because from that day forward, when disaster struck, the universe would remember who ran toward the fire first and who learned to run with them.